Rain tapped gently on the fogged glass of Millie's Diner, a small place tucked off the highway, the kind of spot where time moves slower than the coffee machine. Every evening around 6, a frail old woman would walk in, always the same table, by the window. Her grey hair was thin, her clothes faded, her hands trembling slightly as she warmed them around a cup of soup. No one knew her name, no one asked, except one person, Jake Miller, a young waiter with tired eyes and an old soul. He noticed everything, how she never ordered more than a small bowl of soup, how she always counted coins carefully, and how she smiled softly as if she didn't want to bother anyone. That night, when she came in soaking wet from the rain, Jake quietly told the cook, "Add a sandwich to her plate. I'll cover it." The woman looked surprised, whispering, "Son, I didn't order this." Jake smiled. "I know, ma'am. It's on the house. You look like you've had a long day." Her lips trembled into a grateful smile. "You remind me of someone I once knew." Jake didn't know what that meant then, but that one free meal would change both their lives forever. As the diner lights flickered and the rain outside thickened, Jake glanced at the old woman by the window, unaware that the past he never knew had just walked back into his world. Morning came slow in Brookdale, a quiet American town where even the clouds seemed to linger a little longer than they should. Jake Miller opened Millie's Diner like he always did. Lights on, coffee brewing, radio humming some old country song. But lately there was one part of his shift he actually looked forward to, the 6 o'clock arrival. Every evening, right on time, the diner doorbell would chime softly, and there she was, the same frail old woman in her threadbare coat and worn-out shoes, holding her small purse like it carried her whole world. She always smiled when she saw Jake, the kind of smile that had both pain and peace hidden inside it. At first, Jake just served her a little extra soup, or slipped a muffin into a paper bag before she left. But then it became a quiet ritual. Every single day, he made sure her plate had more than she could afford. And every single day, she'd say the same thing: "You're too kind, son. The world doesn't make many like you anymore." Jake would laugh it off, pretending it didn't mean much, but inside it did. Because the truth was, Jake knew what it felt like to be invisible. He grew up in foster homes, working double shifts just to keep the lights on. Maybe that's why he noticed her in the first place, because he recognized that same loneliness sitting by the window. Weeks passed, the town's routine didn't change, but something about that table did. It became a story of quiet kindness no one talked about, a small flame of humanity burning steady in the corner of a cold world. One night, after closing, Jake found something strange. On her usual table sat a small napkin, folded neatly. Inside it was a single silver locket, old and dented, with a faded picture of a little boy inside, maybe 6 or 7 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes. On the back of the photo, written faintly in trembling handwriting, "My Jake." Jake froze. His heart thudded hard in his chest. The room suddenly felt too quiet. He looked toward the window. She was gone, walking slowly down the foggy street, her silhouette fading under the yellow streetlight. He whispered to himself, half in disbelief, "No, that can't be." The diner clock ticked loud in the silence. Outside, the rain began again. Soft, unrelenting, as if the heavens themselves knew something long lost was about to be found again. The next morning, Jake barely slept. The sound of rain had lingered through the night, tapping against his apartment window, like questions he couldn't answer. He kept replaying that moment, the locket, the photograph, the trembling handwriting that said, "My Jake." By sunrise, he was back at Millie's Diner before anyone else. The place was empty. Chairs stacked, lights dim, the smell of yesterday's coffee still hanging in the air. He sat at her table, and placed the locket on the surface. It looked so small, so harmless, yet it felt heavy, like it carried years of something unspoken. He opened it again. The little boy's smile stared back at him, the same blonde hair, same blue eyes he saw every morning in his own mirror. Could it be? He whispered the words but didn't finish the thought, because even thinking it out loud felt too big. Too dangerous. The bell above the diner door jingled. Millie, the owner, had arrived early. She looked at him with curious eyes. "You okay, Jake? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jake hesitated, then slid the locket across the table. "You ever seen this before?" Millie leaned in, squinting through her old reading glasses. "That's the old lady's, ain't it? She's been coming here for years. Never talks much about herself. I think she lives down by the church, that tiny blue house on the corner." Jake's heart skipped. Know her name? Millie thought for a moment, then nodded softly. Evelyn Harper. Jake froze. The name hit him like thunder through still air. Harper. It was his last foster family's name, the one he'd stayed with until he was 10. The family that split after a car accident took the life of his foster father. He never knew what happened to Mrs. Harper afterward. They said she moved away, or maybe just disappeared. And now, decades later, she was sitting by the window of his diner, eating soup like a stranger. He stood, pacing slowly, his mind spinning with questions and flashes of half-buried memories, a soft voice calling him sweetheart, the smell of cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings, and a lullaby hummed by someone he couldn't picture anymore. He walked outside, the cold morning air biting his skin. The streets of Brookdale were empty, puddles reflecting the gray sky. The church bells in the distance tolled once, twice, 3 times. Jake looked toward the far end of the road. There it was, a small, weathered blue house, its paint peeling, the porch sagging slightly, curtains drawn, chimney quiet. He hesitated, then whispered to himself, Evelyn Harper. He started walking, each step echoing with a mix of fear and hope. When he reached the porch, he noticed a small brass mailbox by the door. On it, scratched but still visible, was a nameplate, E. Harper. He raised his hand to knock, but before he could, the door creaked open, just a few inches. A faint voice from inside said, I knew you'd come, Jake. He froze. The world around him seemed to stop. The birds, the wind, even the ticking clock inside his head. That voice, gentle, trembling, yet unmistakably familiar. She was standing in the dim light of the doorway, Evelyn Harper, and the same woman from the diner, her eyes now soft and wet, like she'd been waiting for this moment for years. Jake's breath caught. He didn't know what to say. How do you know my name? She smiled faintly. Because, sweetheart, I've said it every night in my prayers. The words hit him like lightning wrapped in tenderness. Tears welled in his eyes before he even realized it. And as the morning light broke through the clouds, spilling over the two of them standing at that quiet doorway, Jake finally understood. This wasn't just an old woman he'd been feeding. This was someone who had once loved him like a son, and somehow life, cruel and miraculous, had brought them back together. The air inside Evelyn Harper's house was heavy, not with dust or age, but with the weight of years that refused to let go. The faint smell of lavender hung in the air, mixed with the sharpness of old books and rain seeping through the wood. The living room was small but filled. Photographs lined the mantel, framed slightly tilted, each one a fragment of another life. Jake stood just inside the doorway, his shoes still wet from the rain. He didn't know where to look. Every inch of the place felt sacred somehow. A faded quilt on the couch, a Bible open on the coffee table, a rocking chair near the window where Evelyn must have sat, watching the same world that had forgotten her. Evelyn shuffled slowly toward the kitchen, her cane tapping softly against the floorboards. Sit, sweetheart, she said gently. You must be tired. I'll make us some tea. Jake wanted to speak, to ask 1,000 questions, but the words tangled in his throat. He sat down and glanced at the photos again. There, in the center, was one that made his chest tighten. A picture of a younger Evelyn, smiling beside a man in uniform, holding a small boy in her arms. That boy was him. He reached out, touching the frame with trembling fingers. That's me, he whispered. Evelyn's voice came from behind him, quiet but steady. You were 5. It was the day before your birthday. You wanted pancakes for dinner. Jake turned, eyes wide, heart pounding. You remember that? She smiled faintly, her hands trembling as she poured the tea. I remember everything. He leaned forward, his voice soft but edged with confusion. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ever come for me? The question broke the air open like glass. Evelyn's hands stopped midair. The teacup rattled slightly as she set it down. I tried, Jake. I tried so many times, but they told me you were gone. After the accident, after Robert died, they said the state took you away. They wouldn't tell me where. Her eyes glistened, tears that had been waiting years to fall. I went to every office, every foster agency. I begged. I even drove to 3 different towns looking for you, but the world doesn't listen to a grieving widow with no money. Jake swallowed hard, his throat tight. I thought you left me. I thought I wasn't worth keeping. Evelyn stepped closer, shaking her head fiercely despite her age. Don't you ever believe that. You were my heart, Jake. Losing you broke something I never got back. Silence filled the room, deep, aching, yet somehow healing. Jake looked down at his hands, trembling. He could feel the years between them closing like the final pages of a book that had been left open too long. I kept that name, he said softly. Miller. They gave it to me when I was 10, but I always felt like it didn't fit, like there was a piece missing. Evelyn smiled through her tears. That's because you were never just Jake Miller. You were Jake Harper. He exhaled shakily, the sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. Evelyn reached for the locket still around his neck. Her wrinkled fingers traced the metal like it was something holy. I wore that for years, until I couldn't afford to fix the chain. Then one day, I lost it. I thought God was telling me to let go, but he wasn't. He was just holding it for you. Jake's eyes shimmered. And now it's back. Because you're back, she smiled. The kind of smile that makes time feel irrelevant. The rain outside softened, light trickling through the curtains, painting both of them in gold and gray. For the first time in decades, the house didn't feel lonely. It felt like forgiveness. The rain hadn't stopped. It fell softly against the windows, a rhythm steady enough to feel like a heartbeat. Jake sat in Evelyn's living room, the cup of tea untouched in his hands. Across from him, Evelyn moved slowly toward an old wooden cabinet, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for something on the top shelf. I want to show you something, she said quietly. From the shadows of the cabinet, she pulled out a dusty photo album. Its cover cracked and faded. On the spine, written in careful cursive, were the words, Sundays. She placed it on the table between them, her fingers lingering on the edges before she opened it. Inside, the pages were thick with photographs, snapshots of moments that seemed frozen in the golden haze of another life. There were pictures of church picnics, birthday cakes, a little boy laughing as bubbles floated through the yard. Jake leaned closer, his throat tightening. That's me, he said softly. That's the backyard. You used to hang those paper lanterns on the fence. Evelyn smiled, her eyes glistening. Every Sunday, you said they made the world look like a dream. Her voice cracked slightly, then steadied again. After you were gone, I kept making them anyway, every Sunday, just in case you ever came home. Jake swallowed hard, his vision blurring. He reached out to turn the page and then froze. Tucked between two photographs was a small envelope, yellowed with age. On the front, in familiar handwriting, were the words, To my Jake, wherever you are. He looked up at Evelyn. She nodded faintly. I wrote you every year on your birthday. I never knew where to send them, but writing them made me feel like I still had you. Jake opened the envelope carefully, afraid it might crumble. Inside was a folded letter. The ink faded, but legible. My dearest Jake, I hope you're safe. I hope you're eating well and laughing sometimes. I dream about your smile, the way you used to run to the porch after school. I still make pancakes every year on your birthday. Sometimes I even set a plate for you, just to feel like you're home. If you ever read this someday, know that I never stopped waiting. Love, Mom. Jake pressed the letter against his chest, his breath catching in the quiet. The clock on the wall ticked softly, slow, almost reverent. You kept all of them? He whispered. Evelyn nodded. Her hand brushed the side of the album, revealing a small wooden box underneath the table. She opened it. Dozens of letters, neatly stacked and tied with a ribbon the color of morning sky. Everyone, she said. There's one for each year. Some I wrote through tears. Some I wrote when I felt brave, but I always wrote. Jake's hands trembled as he lifted the box, his fingertips grazing the worn paper edges. The weight of years, of silence, of love that refused to die. Then he saw it, a final envelope different from the rest. It wasn't yellowed, but new, sealed. On the front, in the same delicate handwriting, were just two words, for today. He looked at Evelyn. Her eyes were soft but distant, like she was standing between two worlds. I wrote that last night, she whispered, before you found me. I didn't know if I'd ever see you again, but I needed to say goodbye just in case. Jake opened the envelope, his hands shaking. Inside was a short note. My Jake, if you're reading this, it means life gave me one last miracle. I don't need tomorrow. I just need today. Seeing you again is all the years I lost, given back at once. You were never lost, sweetheart. You were always coming home. Jake couldn't speak. The room seemed to dissolve around him. The rain outside, the ticking clock, the soft breath of the woman across from him. He leaned forward, tears slipping silently down his face, and took Evelyn's frail hand in his. You don't have to say goodbye, he whispered. Not anymore. Evelyn smiled, her thumb brushing over his knuckles, a gesture so familiar it shattered him. Then let's just sit, she said softly, like old times. And so they did. No more words, just the rain, the letters, and the quiet sound of love finding its way home after a lifetime of being lost. The rain had turned colder that week. It came in waves, sometimes soft and misty, sometimes fierce enough to shake the windows. Jake stayed by Evelyn's side every day. He came after his shifts at the diner, bringing soup, flowers and stories just to make her smile. But she was growing weaker, her steps shorter, her voice thinner. The doctors called it heart fatigue. Jake called it unfair. Evelyn's house had changed too. The once tidy shelves now held vases of wildflowers he'd brought. Her chair by the window faced the street, where puddles shimmered like tiny mirrors. And the photo album, the Sunday album, always sat open on the table as if the past itself was keeping her company. That evening, as the last light faded into the drizzle, Jake found her dozing in the chair, a blanket around her shoulders, her breathing light and uneven. He stood there for a while, watching. The room smelled like rain, tea, and lavender, the scent of her whole life distilled into one soft moment. He knelt beside her and whispered, "Hey, it's me." Her eyes fluttered open, and she smiled weakly. "You're here, always," he said. She looked at the window. The rain had begun to fall again, gentler this time, almost tender. "Your father loved the rain," she murmured. "He used to say it washes the world clean." Jake nodded, his throat too tight for words. "Do you think?" She paused, her gaze drifting to the locket around his neck. "When it rains like this, the past forgives us?" He squeezed her hand. "I think it already has." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "You sound just like him." A silence settled. Not empty, but sacred, the kind that only happens when two souls understand each other without needing words. Jake reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper. "I found this in the diner's lost and found box years ago," he said softly. "I think it was yours." Evelyn unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was a child's drawing, crayon lines of a stick boy holding hands with a woman under a big blue sky. At the bottom, in crooked letters, it said, "Me and Mom." Her breath hitched. "You kept it?" Jake smiled through tears. "Always, even when I didn't know who she was." Evelyn's hand found his cheek, her touch feather light. "You found me, Jake. That's all that matters now." Outside, thunder rumbled softly, rolling through the distance like a heartbeat fading into memory. The rain thickened, tapping against the window in a slow, steady rhythm. Jake pulled his chair closer, his voice low and warm. "Tell me about the pancakes again," he said. Evelyn's eyes brightened just a little. "You'd wake up before sunrise. I'd still be half asleep, and you'd stand by the bed with that wooden spoon saying, 'Mom, it's pancake day.'" Jake chuckled through tears. "Guess some things never change." She smiled, her eyelids growing heavy. "No, sweetheart, they don't." The clock ticked softly. The rain slowed. Evelyn's hand slipped gently from his, resting peacefully on the blanket. Jake sat there, unmoving, listening to the sound of the last drops hitting the glass, the last rain of the season. The world outside was quiet, wrapped in grey. He didn't cry at first. He just sat, holding her hand, whispering the words she'd waited a lifetime to hear. "You're home, Mom, you're home." The candle on the table flickered once, then went out. But in the silence that followed, Jake could swear he still heard her voice, soft, distant, carried on the rain. "I don't need tomorrow. I just needed today." The next morning, the world felt heavier, quieter than it had any right to be. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets of Brookdale glistening beneath a pale gray sky. Jake stood by the window, staring at the empty chair where Evelyn used to sit. The blanket was still there, folded neatly, holding the faintest trace of her lavender scent. He hadn't slept. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, that soft smile, those trembling hands, the way she said, "Sweetheart," like it was the only word that ever mattered. The house felt too still. Even the clock on the wall ticked slower, like time itself was mourning. Jake began to move through the house quietly, not as a guest, not even as a son, but as someone who didn't know how to leave yet. He touched the photo frames, the chipped teacup, the Bible with worn pages marked by her handwriting. Then he saw it, the small wooden box on the side table, the one filled with letters she'd written to him over the years. He opened it gently, his hands trembling. Dozens of envelopes stared back at him, faded, fragile, tied with a blue ribbon. But one was different. It wasn't tied with the others. Its edges were slightly damp, the ink smudged as if touched by rain. On the front, in her familiar handwriting, were 3 simple words: "For when it rains." Jake felt something inside him shift. He sat down at the table, the light spilling weakly through the curtains, and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, written in the shaky penmanship of her final days. "My Jake, if you're reading this, it means I've gone home, but not the way I dreamed. I wanted to see you smile one more time. I wanted you to know that you were never forgotten, not for a single day. Life took us down 2 different roads, but love kept walking beside us both. Don't let the rain make you sad, sweetheart. It's not the sky crying. It's the earth remembering. Every drop is a prayer, every storm a promise. When it rains, think of me, not in sorrow, but in warmth. Make pancakes, feed someone hungry. Be kind the way you were to me when you didn't even know who I was. That's how you'll keep me alive, not in memory, but in kindness. Love always, Mom." Jake read it once, then twice, then again, each word carving itself deeper into his heart. He didn't realize he was crying until a drop fell onto the page, one more stain beside the rain that had already touched it. He looked up at the window. Outside, the clouds were gathering again. The first few drops began to fall, tapping softly against the glass, steady, rhythmic, familiar. Jake smiled through the tears. He stood, walked to the stove, and reached for the old skillet that hung above it. He poured some batter His hand steady, his heart lighter, and the smell of pancakes filled the little house. He set 2 plates on the table, one for himself, one across from him, where the photo album lay open on the page of Evelyn holding him as a child. "For you, Mom," he whispered. "It's pancake day." Outside, the rain kept falling, soft, endless, forgiving, and for the first time in a long, long while, it didn't feel sad. It felt like she was home. The rain had stopped by morning, but the world still wore its reflection. Streets shimmered like glass, and the diner's neon sign flickered to life through the mist. Millie's Diner, glowing faintly in red and gold. Jake stood outside for a long moment before walking in. The bell above the door gave that familiar soft chime, the same one that used to echo through his shifts for years. But this time, everything felt slower, lighter, like the air itself was breathing differently. The smell of coffee, syrup, and fresh toast filled the room. The booths were half empty, the usual morning crowd trickling in, truck drivers, nurses, tired faces starting another day. Jake nodded to them out of habit. He wasn't wearing his apron this time, no uniform, just a simple gray coat and the old locket around his neck, Evelyn's locket. He walked toward the back corner of the diner, to the booth by the window, the same one where she used to sit every Sunday, her warm smile lighting the place more than the sun ever did. Jake set down a small photo frame on the table, Evelyn's picture, smiling softly, a cup of tea in her hands. He placed it carefully against the salt shaker so it wouldn't fall. Then he sat across from her, the same way he used to when she was alive, and whispered, "Morning, Mom." The waitress, a young woman named Clara, noticed him from the counter. "You want your usual, Jake?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Yeah, and an extra plate." She nodded, already understanding. She'd seen Evelyn's photo enough times to know this wasn't strange. It was love, just taking on a quieter shape. Jake spent the next hour like that, just sitting, sipping coffee, and watching the rain slide down the glass. Every now and then, someone would walk in, drenched, tired, hungry, and Jake would stand up to greet them, offer his booth, pay for their meal. No speeches, no pity, just quiet kindness, the way Evelyn had taught him without words. One afternoon, a little boy came in, maybe 6 years old, barefoot, holding a crumpled dollar in his tiny hand. His clothes were soaked and his hair stuck to his forehead. The waitress hesitated, unsure what to do, but Jake walked up, knelt down, and smiled. "Hey, buddy, you hungry?" The boy nodded, eyes wide. "Come on," Jake said gently. "You can sit by the window." He guided the boy to Evelyn's booth, wiped the seat dry with a napkin, and placed a plate of pancakes in front of him. Warm, golden, just the way she used to make them. The boy dug in without a word, and Jake watched, not with sadness, but with peace. Outside, the rain began again, soft, silver, steady. The boy looked up mid-bite. "Mister, who's the lady in the picture?" Jake smiled. "Someone who loved pancakes more than anyone I know." The boy giggled, mouth full, and said, "She looks nice." Jake nodded, his eyes glistening. She was. When the boy finished, Jake handed him an umbrella. "For next time it rains," he said. The kid grinned and ran out into the drizzle, swinging the umbrella wildly. Jake turned back to the window, where Evelyn's photo caught the reflection of falling rain, soft, golden, alive. That became his routine. Every Sunday, Jake would sit at the diner window, 2 plates, 2 coffees, one conversation that never really ended. And every week, someone new would walk through that door, a stranger, a traveler, a lost soul, and find warmth in the booth by the window. Some nights, the staff would find a note tucked under the photo frame. Sometimes it was a drawing from a kid, sometimes a thank you letter, sometimes a few coins left behind by someone who couldn't afford their meal but wanted to give back. Over time, the window booth became something more, a quiet shrine of love, kindness, and memory. People called it Evelyn's Corner. Jake never asked for credit. He just smiled when someone smiled back. That was enough. One evening, as the sun set behind the rain clouds, Jake noticed something strange. A rainbow arching across the gray sky, right outside the diner window. Its reflection fell perfectly across the photo frame, bathing Evelyn's picture in soft colors. He felt something stir inside, like a whisper from the other side of the rain. "Keep feeding them, sweetheart." Jake blinked, the sound fading with the wind. He smiled, picked up his coffee, and whispered, "Always, Mom." And as he watched the world through the diner window, wet streets, tired faces, small acts of love, he finally understood. The rain hadn't taken her away. It had given her back to everyone who still needed her. The diner lights glowed warmer that night, and outside, beneath the soft, endless drizzle, the world looked washed clean, just like she'd said it would. The morning light spilled across Millie's Diner like honey, soft, warm, slow. The bell over the door chimed again and again as locals shuffled in, shaking off umbrellas, brushing rain from their jackets. But today, something felt different. There was a kind of hum in the air, a gentle curiosity, like everyone could feel that something special was about to happen. At the far booth by the window, Evelyn's corner, Jake sat quietly, as he always did. 2 plates, 2 coffees, 1 small photo frame catching the golden light. He was stirring his coffee absent-mindedly when he noticed a woman standing at the counter, camera around her neck, a notebook in hand. She looked out of place among the truckers and nurses, but her eyes held the same warmth that once lived in Evelyn's. "Jake Lawson?" she asked softly, walking toward his table. He looked up, cautious but polite. "That's me. I'm Sarah Dean with the Brookdale Chronicle. I've been hearing stories about this place. About you." Jake frowned slightly. "About me?" Sarah smiled. "About how every Sunday people find a free meal, a kind word, and a photo of a woman who seems to change lives." Jake chuckled quietly, glancing at Evelyn's picture. "I think she's the one doing that part." Sarah sat down, setting her recorder gently on the table. "Would you tell me about her? About Evelyn's corner?" For a moment, Jake hesitated. He wasn't one for attention, but something about her voice, the kindness in it, reminded him of his mother. He nodded slowly. He started from the beginning. How Evelyn had once been just another customer, an old woman with a quiet smile and tired eyes. How she used to leave notes of gratitude under her plate. How after her passing, he found her letters and the truth that she was the mother he'd never known. Sarah didn't interrupt once. She just listened, really listened, as rain began to tap softly against the window. When he finished, she looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Jake, this story," she whispered, "it's what people need right now. It's hope. It's what the world's been forgetting." Jake smiled faintly. "It's not a story, ma'am. It's just breakfast and a little love." That line, "just breakfast and a little love," would later become the headline of the article that changed everything. When the Brookdale Chronicle published the story the next Sunday, the photo of Jake and Evelyn's frame at the diner window went viral. Thousands of readers from across the country wrote in, sending letters, donations, even handwritten notes, saying how Evelyn's story reminded them of their own mothers, grandmothers, and lost loves. A week later, the diner owner called Jake into the office. "You seeing this?" he said, holding up his phone. "We've got people driving 2 hours just to sit in Evelyn's corner." Jake laughed softly. She always did have a way of bringing people together. Soon, the little booth by the window turned into something sacred, a living memorial of love and second chances. People began leaving small tokens on the table, a rose, a folded note, a photo of someone they missed. The staff placed a small sign above the window that read, "In memory of Evelyn, proof that love never fades, it only finds new hands." Sarah returned a month later, this time not as a journalist, but as a friend. She found Jake behind the counter, flipping pancakes for a line of hungry strangers. "Looks like you started a movement," she said, smiling. Jake shrugged with a grin. "Nah, just continuing hers." That evening, as the last customer left and the lights dimmed, Jake sat again by the window. The rain had returned, soft and steady, painting silver trails down the glass. He looked at Evelyn's photo, then at the reflection of all the people she'd quietly brought together. He whispered, almost to himself, "You see this, Mom? You're feeding the whole town now." And as thunder rolled gently in the distance, a flash of lightning caught the window. For just a second, her reflection shimmered beside his. 2 faces, side by side in the rain. He didn't flinch, he just smiled. Guess some miracles don't need words. Outside, the streetlights flickered. The rain fell like blessings. And inside the diner, Evelyn's corner glowed, eternal, unassuming, and full of quiet. The years slipped by softly, like rain fading into mist. Millie's diner changed. New faces, new booths, brighter lights, but Evelyn's corner stayed the same. The photo frame still sat by the window. The sign above it still read, "Proof that love never fades." And every Sunday morning, Jake still showed up, gray-haired now, slower in his steps, but carrying the same warmth in his eyes. He'd become something of a legend in Brookdale, the man who never missed a Sunday, the man who made pancakes for strangers. People came from out of town just to meet him, to shake his hand, to sit across from Evelyn's picture, to feel what love left behind. But Jake never saw himself as anything special. He still called it just breakfast and a little love. That morning, the sun broke through after a week of heavy rain. The streets shone, clean and gold. Jake walked slowly to the diner, his coat buttoned, his locket resting against his chest. When he pushed open the door, the bell chimed that familiar sound, soft and sweet, like memory itself. The staff greeted him with smiles. "Morning, Jake." "Morning, sweetheart," he replied, his voice a little thinner now, but still kind. He took his usual seat by the window, set down 2 plates, 2 coffees, and the photo frame. He sat quietly, looking out at the street, lost in thought. The diner was busier than usual. Laughter, clinking cups, the smell of coffee and rain-soaked coats. Then, a small voice broke through the hum. "Excuse me, are you Mr. Lawson?" Jake turned. A little girl stood by the booth, maybe 8 years old, her hair tied in a ponytail, holding a folded piece of paper in both hands. She looked nervous, but her eyes, soft, brown, curious, held something familiar. "That's me," Jake said gently. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily," she said. "My grandma asked me to give you this." She handed him the paper. Jake unfolded it slowly. The edges were yellowed, the handwriting shaky but unmistakable. It was Evelyn's. He read the first line aloud, his voice trembling. "For whoever finds kindness in my boy, know that you've met a piece of me." Jake froze. His eyes flicked up to Lily. "Your grandma, what was her name?" "Sarah Dean," she said. "She used to write stories. She said you were her favorite one." Jake smiled softly, tears already gathering. "Sarah, the journalist who'd told Evelyn's story to the world," Lily continued, her voice small. "She told me before she passed that if I ever came here, I should sit by this window and eat pancakes with you." Jake blinked hard, the light from the window blurring through his tears. He smiled and motioned to the booth. "Then I guess it's breakfast time, huh?" The girl giggled and slid into the seat across from him. He poured syrup, cut the pancakes in half, and they ate together in a comfortable silence. Outside, rain began to fall again. Soft, rhythmic, forgiving. Lily looked at the photo frame. "Is that her?" Jake nodded. "That's Evelyn, my mom. She looks kind," the girl said. "She was," Jake replied. "Still is." They sat for a while longer, the rain whispering against the glass. When they finished, Lily took out a small notebook and started drawing, a simple sketch of the two of them at the booth, the photo frame between them, the rain outside. At the bottom, in crooked letters, she wrote, "Me, Jake, and Evelyn." Jake laughed softly, his voice warm. "You're a good artist, kiddo. My grandma said stories never end," Lily said. "They just keep finding new people." Jake reached across the table and took her small hand. She was right. The bell over the door rang as another customer entered, but Jake didn't notice. He was watching Lily, this little stranger who somehow carried all the people he'd loved. Evelyn, Sarah, everyone who'd touched Evelyn's corner. The rain grew heavier, painting the window in silver light. Jake leaned back, his eyes drifting toward Evelyn's picture. "You see this, Mom? You're still feeding them." That was his last breakfast. When the staff came to check on him a while later, Jake was sitting peacefully, one hand resting beside Evelyn's photo, the faintest smile on his face. The coffee had gone cold. Outside, the storm had stopped, the clouds parting to reveal a slice of soft blue sky. They found a note on the table beside him, written in his neat, careful handwriting. "For when it rains, feed someone. For when it's sunny, remember someone. Love never leaves. It just finds another table." Lily's drawing lay beside it, colors bright and alive. The next week, the Brookdale Chronicle ran one final story, "The Man Who Fed the Rain." Evelyn's corner remained just as he'd left it. 2 plates, 2 coffees, 1 photo, 1 frame. And every Sunday, someone new would sit there, sometimes alone, sometimes with a child, always with pancakes. Outside, rain would fall, soft, endless, forgiving. And through the diner window, it always looked the same, like love was still sitting there, waiting for the next hungry soul to